Okay, now we're going. So tell me your name.
Jean Bell Harrington.
Okay, and what was your parents' names?
Well, my dad's name, this will sound familiar, John Bell Harrington. And his wife, my mom, was Sally, is what she called herself. Sally. Her given first name, which she should be using but didn't like at all, Sarah. And Pickens was her last name, so Sarah Pickens Harrington was who she was in northern New York where we lived.
And tell me your brother's name.
Robert, aka Bob or Bobby Pickens Harrington.
And so tell me a little bit about growing up and on the farm in a very general sense, where you lived, where you were born, and where you grew up.
I was extraordinary fortunate in so many ways. First of all, I had parents who, and I'm going to use this word, truly adored each other and were excited on having a child at all, and were okay with having a daughter. And later along, when a little boy came along, they were ecstatic, and that was our family. There was an extended part to that. My grandmother and grandfather. My grandfather was as excited as my parents when I was born, to the point that he had purchased a tiny child's ring with an actual diamond in it for me as a child. I mean, it was the ultimate, I guess, that he could think of to celebrate it.
And so his name was?
His name was Riley Harrington, and at the moment I can't remember his middle name, but it's probably going to come to me, but I can't right now, I'm sorry.
And your grandmother's name?
Well, it depends. You want to know what it was when she was born? Her first name was Flossie.
Flossie.
However, to everyone who knew her as an adult, she called herself Florence because Flossie was such, a I guess, not ready for prime time kind of name. She wanted to be thought of as a lady, and Flossie was never going to get her there, so she changed that. And what did I leave out about her?
Well, so who are the other extended family members who lived nearby or lived with you on the farm or contributed to your early life?
Well, there was a brother and sister, an aunt and an uncle. They were of my father that lived in a nearby town. I had an aunt, I'll give her name, M. Elizabeth Pickens, but she was my Aunt Billy. She never used, her full name in our family. And she lived in Baltimore, and I would say she was also equally excited with my parents, when I and my brother were born. She would give gifts. Gifts would come in the mail and cards and telephone calls. And so she was part of the family. And then she had some really important positions in her life. She was an important person in her field, which was healthcare. And so she would get long vacations in the summer and come and spend them with us on the farm. And she wouldn't do any work. She would just enjoy herself while the farm work went on around her. So it was a very interesting thing, but we had her full attention. And so those were the people that I loved the most.
Where were you born?
I talking about a city or just northern New York or?
As specific as you can.
Okay. I was born in a hospital in the city. Okay, that was called Watertown. Still is. It's still a, medium-sized city in northern New York. The little town where we lived, a very small community, was Adams Center.
And that's where the farm was.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the neighborhood? What was the town? It was near Dry Hill, or was it?
Well, Dry Hill wasn't a town. It's an explanation for a whole neighborhood. You can't call a neighborhood a thing as spread out as the countryside was. An area of the countryside. And in fact, the road that ran beside our house, like where the mailman came, was called the Dry Hill Road. Dry Hill was our mailing address, Dry Hill, Adams Center.
So where did that name come from?
My grandfather loved to say that it was because it was like a flip, like a euphemism for a place where a lot of hard liquor was made.
Okay.
Dry Hill.
It's ironic.
Yeah.
So tell me about the farm. When was how many generations before yours operated that farm?
Really, there were a couple of different farms, one owned by my grandfather and one owned by his brother. But our farm was really just two generations, just as far as I know, my grandfather and my father.
What kind of farm was it?
It was a dairy farm. And of course, a dairy farm meant you also had to have, in those days when we were starting out, you had to have horses. Horses would pull the manure wagon, or horses would pull the hay wagon, and so you had horses as well, so as the cattle that you were milking. And then of course you had your dog to go out and fetch the cattle and help bring them back in.
Herd the cattle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When were you born?
10/11/1939, October 11, 1939.
And so, at what age do you remember? What was your earliest recollection of working on the farm? What are some of your early memories as being put to work as the oldest kid?
Really, something that I felt fantastic about, I felt important about, is the one I'm going to mention. There were probably other things that came first, but my most important role was when my father would be away from the farm because he was running machinery out in the fields or something, and my grandfather and I would do the evening milking. Now, I was never asked to do the morning, 12 hours apart on a farm, morning, and then 12 hours later, the evening milking. But I felt so important when I got to be right there with my grandfather, and he never acted like he was my boss. He always acted like we were a team when I worked with him. I think you can tell that I pretty much adored my grandfather. Yeah, so that was big, and I think I don't think that started until I was probably 11, probably 11 before I was actually his partner, doing the milking, just the two of us the evening milking, just the two of us. And I didn't do any other kinds of work that men did in the field because a lot of it was dangerous. You're not going to put your kid on the top of a hay wagon because the kid could easily fall off. You're not going to put your kid driving a tractor, which is not an easy thing to maneuver. So there are not a lot of roles that a young person can have as far as helping run the farm. No, the garden was a different thing, Lots of roles for a young person in a garden. So
what was the garden like? A vegetable garden to
yes,
feed the family?
Yes, a lot. My grandfather used what was called a harrow to get the every year, I think, to get it kind of straightened back out again, to loosen up the clods and get out anything that shouldn't be in the garden and kind of start it over. And so from then that point on, I helped a lot. And to my recollection, my mother had two favorite things to do. Both of them, in that period of time, spring through fall. Both of them because they were outdoors. Number one, she loved to do laundry and hang it out. Okay, she's outdoors doing that. But the other was garden work, gardening, vegetables. She loved doing that. And at the time that I'm talking about, from the time I was 7 or so, she had gone back to teaching school because they really needed her so much in our school system. She had been a fantastic, important teacher, I'm going to say, and
this was post-World War II? Post-World War II?
40s, yeah. Mm-hmm. And but my dad had met her on Long Island, New York, and where he had gone to make his fortune, which didn't pan out. And then his dad had needed him back on the farm, so that was the end of that, New York for my dad. But my mother had been at the top of her school, there wasn't a graduate school, her college class, and on that basis, she was able to get a really prestigious teaching job on Long Island, New York, which basically was peopled with people who had a lot of means and could kind of get what they wanted for everything, and they wanted a smart teacher for their children. And so my mom and dad met when she was in that position as a teacher on Long Island in New York.
Where did she go to school?
She went to school in Pennsylvania. She grew up in Pennsylvania, and I can't remember the name of the college. She graduated at the top of her class in college. And there's a tiny, funny little story that I'd like to tell quickly.
You have permission.
Thank you. You can cut it out. My brothers anyway, the man the woman that he's connected with and lives with, his Penny realized in Bob's talk with her that her mother also attended the same college that Mom had, and just praised my mother. She top of the class. She was a shining star there. So that was kind of fun, for me to hear.
Did your dad go to college?
No, he did not. He decided that he was going to be a real big thing. And so he went to a business school. Now, it was not a college, but it was a business school to get all sorts of, everything you would need to know to kind of walk into a business and not make a mess out of paperwork or all the decisions that you would have to make, everything you might need to know about, not about the people part, but, about the technical parts. So that's what he did. And then he started on his trek, which the intention of going to New York City, introducing himself to a man that was head of a big, and now I can't even remember the stores, what they were called. I think it was Woolworths. It was Woolworth, because they were started, the Woolworth stores, if you ever heard about them, and those are old ones, they were started by a man who lived in the little town near us. So my dad thought, oh, okay, boy, do I have an in. I'll just get myself down there. I'll have, some skills of, using spreadsheet. They didn't call them spreadsheets then, but, office skills. And I'll get down there, and boy, I'm going to take over New York City, go into Woolworth and do it. And it didn't work out quite that way, and so it wasn't a good match, him in New York City, but that wasn't what ended it. What ended my dad in his New York City dream was that my grandfather, who was, everybody's getting older, my grandfather was getting older, and he just didn't feel that he had what it took to continue running that farm without somebody, working with them as a partner. And the only reasonable partner would have been my father. So he told Dad, I'm going to sell the farm. If you don't want to get up here and work it so much for you, I'm going to sell the farm, the ultimatum. He just hung it out there. And my dad had by that time figured out that Woolworth, the JT, whatever his name was, JP, was not going to put him like at the top of their little hierarchy in the store. That was a pipe dream. He got it figured out. And so then, and also, by then he had met my mother. And so Dad thought there was a solution here. He'd been offered a solution by his father, who didn't want to run the farm, didn't want to give the farm away either. And so my dad came home. That was the end of his big city career.